Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare.
Welcome to the Shiva Shakti Online Ayurvedic Yoga Teacher Training. This is philosophy class number 1.
So lovely to have you here again. As you look into your manual, you'll see a beautiful image there. And this is a beautiful allegory that comes from the Vishnu Purana. I'm going to start today's lecture with a brief myth. And then from the myth, we're going to go through and define from the classic texts the definition of Ayurveda in a nice brief definition today. And then we'll go into the linking the two systems of Ayurveda and yoga and starting to see the bridge between these two systems, the sister sciences of yoga and Ayurveda. So that'll be very exciting. And then we'll move into elements, and then we're going to move into doshas. So that will be today's class. So there'll be 5 segments to today's class. But just to start, I'd like you to kind of get in relaxed mode for just a moment. I'm going to start with just a little story, which will help set the stage, if you will, for Ayurveda. It's a classic way that we teach in yoga, is to be able to encase, if you will, the energy through symbolic means. And so this is a beautiful story. I'm going to get my storyteller voice here for just a second. And so once upon a time, in the heavens, this is the story of Kshira Sagra, the ocean of milk. So you imagine a great ocean of milk. And up in the heavens, there's Lord Indra, and he's walking with his great elephant, his Gaja, and he's up on his elephant. He's going through heavens, and Indra's the king of heavens, mind you, and he likes thunder and lightning, and he thinks he's a pretty cool guy. And he's out one day, and he's kind of giving these blessings. He's giving these rosaries of garland of mala. He's putting around these different necks. So he goes by Durvasa. Durvasa is a great sage, and he has just a little bit of spiritual ego. He thinks he's kind of great. So he goes up to Durvasa. He's on the elephant. He might be looking down. You imagine this great god, and he goes to Durvasa and he gives him this garland and puts the garland around Durvasa's neck. Well, Durvasa wants to teach him a little lesson. This is how the stories begin. So Durvasa, after he receives it, takes the garland off, and in a gesture, he goes and he places it back, up around the elephant's face. Well, this is like God blessing God, if you will. But Indra had a little spiritual ego, and he said, he got a little offended. He said, I give you some flowers, and you give them back to me. What's the matter with you? Like this. And Durvasa, he said, I'm going to curse you. And he said, this is not great, so don't go cursing people. But this happened. So he gave him like a little curse. He said, you and all the gods in heaven, you're going to lose your powers. He said, oh no, this is not so good. So this is the beginning of the story. So the Asuras, Asura means a shining one. So the gods in heaven are called Shuras, they're shining. The Devas and Devatas are shining ones. So the Asuras are gods that are shining. The Asuras are the ones who are shining, but they have a little bit of ego in there. So Asura, the Asuras are the little devils, if you will. So they're divine beings with like a little spiritual ego. So the Asuras are superpowers, mind you. And the Asuras they take over all of heaven. The gods are weak, and they say, oh my gosh, there's so many problems here in heaven. The rain's not coming. Gravity on the earth is not working so good. So there's all kinds of problems. So they say, look, ever since Indra, you cursed the gods, you got to make a fix on this. So he goes over to Lord Vishnu. He says, Vishnu, I need some help. I made a mistake. I offended this Durvasa. And once you make a curse, you can't undo it. So Vishnu says, well, I will help you get back your secret superpowers so you can, be the guardians of heaven and make sure all the seasons work and the moon goes around the earth and all this like this. So he says, what we'll do is you've got to get the soma from the ocean. You've got to churn the ocean of milk. But the problem, so you get this soma, which will give you your immortality back. The problem is this: you have to enlist the asuras to help you. So this is a very interesting fact, because most of the time when the hero is given the journey, they don't have to recruit the asura to help them out. Well, in this particular case, the soma, which is the sacred life-giving nectar for the superpower, is at the bottom of the ocean. So they say, well, we must first get a churning rod and a rope. Like, when you churn butter, of course you have done this so many times in your house, the old-fashioned way, you used to, if you didn't know this. So you have a rope like this with a stick, and the stick, a paddle, moves back and forth, and it churns the butter. So they have an idea. They say, well, let's get Mount Meru. Mount Meru is the largest mountain in all the heavens. And so they grab Mount Meru, and they bring it to the ocean. And they say, well, that's the staff, that's the danda. I know this is a long story. It takes many days. So just bear with me. Don't die of boredom. So listen. So then they need a snake. So they need a snake. They need a rope. So they go get Vasuki. Vasuki is a cosmic snake. And we talk about Vasuki, Adishesha in the Yoga Nidra course. So that's a different story. But so they get this giant cosmic snake, and the gods go to the demons, the asuras, and they say, hey, look, we need to churn the ocean to get this soma. And the asuras are like, hey, we want some immortal superpower juice. Yeah, let's do it. So the gods, they're going to trick them because they're going to try to take it for themselves, but they enlist the asuras. And this is a key feature. So what happens is they put the snake 3.5 times around Mount Meru, and they're standing there, and the mountain begins to sink because it's a mountain is sinking in the ocean. So just then, just in time, is Lord Vishnu comes, and he's reborn as Kurma. Kurma is the avatar of Lord Vishnu when he comes. So that's a different story for today. But the giant tortoise comes, the size of the whole continent, comes and holds underneath the ocean, holds underneath the mountain. Very complex. It's all very symbolic, which we can unpack at the end, because don't worry, this is going to make sense. So they start churning, and then the snake starts spitting out all this poison, and the demons, they're holding, because they didn't want the tail, because we're the demons, and we won't hold the tail because we only want to hold the head. So they're churning, and they're getting all this smoke and then poison in their face, and they're coughing, and then after all the poison clears, what happens with the churning of the milk? Out starts to come up from the bottom of this cosmic ocean all of these treasures. There's 14 of these treasures. I won't give you every treasure because you're thinking, oh no more story. Okay, so listen. So from all these things that come up, the Kamadhenu, the wish-fulfilling cow. Everyone needs a wish-fulfilling cow. Many things. I told you I wasn't going to tell you. But the last thing that comes up, okay, this is the story, is Lord Vishnu. No, Vishnu. No, Lord Dhanvantari. Dhanvantari, when he comes up, he is the patron saint, if you will, of Ayurveda. Here he is. He pops up out of the ocean. There he is. Very nice South Indian version. So Dhanvantari, he comes up, and he has 4 attributes in his hand. First, he has a Kancha and Shanka, Kancha and Chakra, a discus and a chakra, which are the symbols of Vishnu. That's why I said, oh, he's Vishnu, because he's like a little manifestation of Vishnu. And he also has a Abhaya Mudra, which is the non-threatening gesture. It means he's a healer. And he also comes with the Ukaka. Let me see my word here. Jalaka. Jalaka means a leech, which is symbolic for leaching out toxins out of the blood, because he's a doctor, he's a exposition. We don't have to get onto the leech topic. Sometimes it's a book. But anyhow, Dhanvantari comes and he has holding in his hand a pot. So what's very interesting about Dhanvantari with the pot is you also see very similar, here he is over here in the corner, he's holding his Dhanvantari, he's got the life-giving liquid. And this soma is a very special liquid of immortality. So the gods, they have enlisted the demons and they've got all this churning, the big story, and they got the soma. Well, now comes the time when they want to, everyone to start drinking it. And of course, the Asuras are like, we're doing this first. And the gods are like, whoa, and there's a fight getting ready to break out. And just then, Mohini arrives. No one knows that this is Lord Vishnu coming, though. Lord Vishnu at the very beginning had said, don't worry, after you get done the churning of the ocean and you create the soma, you bring it up, then I will come just at the right time so you can get the nectar and the Asuras will be vanquished. So he comes, and he comes as Mohini. Now, I remember when our teacher was talking about Mohini, he defined her as the divine babe, the divine, delusional. She's the divine enchantress. She's the seductive force, really, of Maya that blinds us all. So she comes, she's like a Marilyn Monroe. She comes in, she knocks everyone out. They're just like, oh my gosh, they're all thinking they want to sit next to her and get her to feed them. And she says in her nice way, says, give me the soma, no fighting, boys. I'm going to dish it out. And they said, no problem, this is great. So they all sit down around this giant table. And she's going, she gives some to Lord Indra, and she gives some to Surya, and she gives some to Agni, and says to the sun, and she gives them to the Lord of Fire, like this. She's going around. Well, there's one Asura who's very smart. His name's Rahu Ketu. Rahu Ketu is he's an Asura that has a keen insight, and he's watching, and he says, we're gonna get robbed out of this immortality stuff. So he gets up around the table and he walks around and he sits down between the sun and the moon, Surya and Chandra. So she's laying it out, and then just as he gets a drop on the tongue, right? Whoosh, Indra comes, cuts his head off. Well, this isn't so great, but Rahu had got just a little bit of that immortality nectar. So Rahu Ketu, even though he's separated, he's an Asura, which represents all kinds of things, the nodes of the moon, but we don't have to go into that. But he got some of the nectar. So he always causes problems like this. So after he goes and gives everyone all the nectar, then the gods, they go and they vanquish the demons out of heaven. And essentially, this is this is the end of the story. So, that was a heck of a telling from Dhanvantari. Let's just for a second unpack it. I know poor Ayana has to suffer through the story. I'm sorry. Okay, so listen to this. The ocean represents the ocean of consciousness. Okay. Now, when we churn, when the churning represents the spiritual practices of yoga. So the mountain represents the spine. That's the point. And here are the two bottom points of the mountain. And the action of the demons and the gods working together represent the forces of the intellect, which is working towards our conscious evolution and working for us to make great choices for our diet and lifestyle and all the like. So all the good choices that we make in life to elevate consciousness and self-awareness. And then the Asuras represent all those little voices in our head that pull us down and make us, make all those incorrect, improper choices when we know better. So those are those two forces. And what's interesting from that churning, what comes? All this poison, right? And so you see, that represents a purification practice in yoga and also in the practice of Ayurveda and Panchakarma, the cleansing practices, that which comes out, and you see who got actually all the poison was the ego. So what you sow, what you shall reap, like this. And then the treasures, the things that come up, The treasures that come up represent all the spiritual boons from doing sadhana, from spiritual practice, from living a divine life, if you will. So I mentioned the kamodenu, the wish-fulfilling cow like this, and then finally comes Dhanvantari at the end. Well, Dhanvantari represents the science of Ayurveda, sister science of yoga, the science of healing and diet and lifestyle, if you will. And so he comes at the very end and gives the immortality. So, we are immortal beings, and he's not saying that we're going to become, physically immortal, but that's a different story. We can talk about that. But what he's doing is he's helping us reclaim our natural birthright, which is health. And Swami Vishnu would say, health is our greatest wealth, like this. So this is a slight unpacking and a really condensed version of the Kshira Sargara, the ocean of milk, and the birth of Dhanvantari, the patron saint, if you will, the father, doctor of Ayurveda. Whew. So from there, what we would normally do in a classical setting is move into the texts in which we begin to source our Ayurveda. So there are many classical texts. We're going to just start defining our terms today out of the Charak Samhita. Now this is very, very lovely because it it sets the stage, if you will, for the healings, art, and science of Ayurveda itself. And this is a very important step into a new paradigm of healing for the Western mind that is reductionistic and materialistic in nature and scientific. So it's not that we want to set aside the Western science, and we'll talk more about the bridges that are being built between the East and West using Ayurveda and modern medicine, but that's not the point quite yet. The point is we can look into the Charak Samhita, and I believe this text is maybe it's 800 years old or so by the time it got codified, but Charak Samhita is in your manual there if you turn the page. And if you look down, you see in the Sutrasthana, the shloka that we're going to be looking at right here says, Shirira Indra Sattva Atma Samyogo Dari Jivitam. So beauty. So beautiful. So let's look and just unpack this because it will give you great insight to the way in which we're going to begin to approach the lensing, if you will, the perspective that we'll approach our Ayurvedic practice. So it says here, body, senses, mind, and soul are the four main components of life. And without their constant connection, life cannot exist. So throughout this course, what we're going to do is, as we unpack the material moving forward, we're going to start from this. So we're going to look at how we define what we mean by body in Ayurvedic terms. So we'll define that. When we define the senses, we'll talk about the five senses, the five Jnana Indriyas and the five Karma Indriyas. So we'll start unpacking those terms, the organs of action and the organs of knowledge, where we're going to talk about the mind and the four components of the mind. So how we define the mind. So it'll be a little bit different and expanded version of what we're used to when we say the word mind in Western sense. And notice the fourth piece. This is soul. And what's so beautiful and so special and so sacred about this particular shloka is this. When you look at the healing systems out there, when you look at Western medicine, for example, it recognizes the existence of body. And we say, okay, that's good. And in the West, we are starting to definitely come online with the mind-body connection. So you can say that recognizing body and mind. And, slowly coming perhaps will be the guarding of the five senses, the Jnana Indriyas and the Karma Indriyas and the organs of action. And so those are all coming, but we are taking an evolutionary step forward here in the West and bringing Dharmic teaching of the Ayurveda, the knowledge of life itself, in a Dharmic way, in accordance with the laws of Mother Nature, when we say the Dharmic way, is also adding into the most important component of this definition is that of soul, that of Atma. And what's so lovely and beautiful about this is that very often when you're just treating someone, you treat just the body, and the problem is in the mind, then you're not going to get the great results. If you treat the body and the senses, you get good results. If you treat body, mind, and senses, you get very good results. But if there's still not a direct connection to our higher purpose, to our true essence, to our dharmas and our karmas, which are latent and active, actively coming out and expressing themselves from the deepest level of the internal witnessing state of the soul, if we link all of these together, all these layers and levels, a spiritual level, a mental level, a pranic level, we'll even add that in there, an energy level, and also the level of physical body, we have a complete and whole and integrated structure and picture and perspective in which to be able to not only, I don't quite want to say the word diagnose because we're not at that level, but be able to assess, if you will, our clients, our students, our friends, our family, even our partner, as you apply these principles and this Ayurvedic lensing or way of seeing, as it's a drashta, it's a way of seeing the world, and intimately linked with soul. We have these components come together as one unit, as a very, very sweet and complete healing system. Now, on a personal note, I'll just digress for just 1 second. As our teachers and the leading teachers that practice Ayurveda here in the West, when we have studied with them, what we have seen is that with Dr. Vasant Lad and many of the other great teachers is that we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. So it's not that we want to throw out Western medicine, but begin to infuse Western medicine with the let's say the dharmic way of seeing that we are soul, seeing that we're experiencing matter, that we have dharma and karma, that we're here to experience in this lifetime, and that we're just not a material body. And so I could go on for that a little bit more, but I'd try to keep it short. So part of the vision here is what we want to do is keep all the best portions of Western medicine, which we could elaborate and quite well, but we want to begin to infuse them with a deep sense of morals, a deep sense of values, a deep sense of ethics, but also a deeper sense than that is with that of soul, and aligning that with Mother Nature. And we have science aligned with nature and soul, and then we have science that is co-evolving, if you will, with Mother Nature rather than against the grain of nature. And this could be a beautiful corrective course that Ayurveda has to be able to offer into, the Dharma has to be able to offer into the Western stream of thinking. So that is our definition so far. Do you have any thoughts in there?
No, I think that's
Okay. Let's go to our next piece. So then the next sort of step we take as a classical teacher, following a format here, is to step into our etymology. And so we always come out of our Sanskrit roots. And by coming out of the Sanskrit root, you have a sense of the basis and the foundation from which all of the tree of Ayurveda is going to be flourishing. So we just begin to start with the words yoga and Ayurveda. So hopefully up to this point, you've been quite well educated in the word yoga. So we just say yoga means to yoke, to unite, to join. Yoga has so many different meanings. So we just say yoga means to yoke or to join. It comes from the Sanskrit verbal root yuj. So the word ayus comes from Sanskrit meaning life. So when we put ayus with Veda, it becomes ayur. So don't worry about that. But we have life with Veda. Now, Veda is a special technical term that means knowledge. So when we put these words together, we have the knowledge of life, or the wisdom of life. So this is very beautiful. So when we're looking at this, yoga and Ayurveda means joining and linking, if you will, ourselves, body, mind, and soul, and energy, with the wisdom of life, with the knowledge of life. So this is very beautiful. We want to realize that if yoga is the science and the art, if you will, of self-realization, the techniques and practices through meditation and mantra and asanas and pranayamas, you know all these. So you understand that yoga is a practical, experiential, technical practice that is in place for realization of the self, the realization of the individual soul yoking with the Supreme Soul. That's a pretty big discussion, but that's not the point, not the thrust of our discussion today. We want to understand that to move in the direction of soul is the goal. So we're always moving in the direction of consciousness in this way, of individual consciousness, and also global consciousness and cosmic consciousness like this. So we're always moving in that direction. But Ayurveda will say, if you don't have a happy physical body, if your physical body, health, which is our greatest wealth, I said that, but it's important to remember this. Health is the greatest wealth. If you don't have a happy physical body, how can you do asana? It's very challenging. How can you sit for meditation? If you have a physical body that is so heavy, so dull, so tamasic, so heavy, so dull, like this, it's very difficult to have enough energy or enough mental clarity or enough even desire to move towards this big question of who am I? What is my purpose? What is my goal in life? So if we start with the body, which is great because you have body, I have body, she has body, everyone you know has a body. But if body is not healthy, then it's very difficult to do everything with mind and then even try to get any extra energy to contemplate your existence when you're down in base existence. So Ayurveda will start with physical body very often. We can start with mental body or energy body, yes, but basis is physical body. So we acknowledge West says physical body. So many people are discomfort. They have so much physical ailments in the body. It's very difficult for them even to get to asana class. So first place we want to say is we can't necessarily realize the full meaning of yoga without happy, healthy, and holy physical body. So we want to go that way. Now these two systems, this is the linking part that I had spoke of. These two systems I would like to just point out to you, they're sister systems. So yoga is based in a philosophy called Samkhya. Samkhya means the numbers, and the special number here is 24, 25. 24 means the 24 elements or constituents of the body and the mind and the world. We're going to talk about the 5 elements today, which make the body and the universe. So we'll talk about those, and Ian will pick that up. But as we look at the 24 elements of Sankhya Yoga philosophy, if you're not familiar with these terms and you'd like to become more familiar with them, because we're going to be enumerating them, but we'll be doing so in instead of a philosophical contest, we'll be going through the 24 elements of Samkhya Yoga in a practical and a technical way. What's the application of the elements, and what's the application of mind and body and 5 senses. So if you would like to check more information about the 24 elements of Samkhya Yoga philosophy here at the Shiva Shakti Yoga School of Yoga, you can check out the philosophy level 1 course, and that I go through that quite thoroughly, step by step. So back on track now, when we're talking about the 2 sciences of Ayurveda and yoga, sister sciences, yoga is being the science of realizing the self. Okay, we got that. And then based in 24 elements of Samkhya, Ayurveda's focus really is that we have happy physical body, we have happy mental body, happy energy body, happy senses. When I say happy, I mean balanced, and I mean intact and and functioning well, when we say happy like that. So when we look at the five senses and the physical body and all those things on a side just for health, for ordinary function, we're over in the realm of Ayurveda. So we're going to notice that we'll shift our focus and how we look at the 24 elements from a yogic perspective into an Ayurvedic perspective of how do we clean up the channels in the body and how do we get energy to move in the body. And these are the Ayurvedic applications and the Ayurvedic practices that we'll go through and unpack throughout this course. So Ayurveda, just to say it one more time, will be in place for the wellness of the body, for the purification of the body, for cleansing of the body, for building of the body like this. And the yogic side will be for the deeper practices that are all based on health. So it's like this. They're both based on the 24 elements. I think I've spoken pretty good on that. Let me just say here.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah, please do.
Sure. So when you put Ayurveda and yoga together in the sense of this course as an Ayurvedic yoga, one thing that we see is in today's world, the practice of yoga, it's so popular. I mean, it's everywhere now. In the West, it's of course coming from the East. It's been there a long time, but we just see it everywhere. And I think it's important to understand that classically speaking, when people came to the practice of yoga as a dedicated practice they did regularly and made a lifestyle of it, that it was already ingrained in their lifestyle, in the culture, classically speaking. Mind you, today it might be different, but in a classical sense, that there was already an understanding of how to care for the body. And so a lot of these Ayurvedic principles were already woven into the framework of one's life. And so they come to a dedicated practice of yoga and they continue with those Ayurvedic practices. And then we come to today's world and we know that not everybody has these dietary and lifestyle components grounded into their system. They're like, I don't know what to eat, when to eat, whatever. It's just like whatever I feel like. And there's not that sense of living in rhythm and in alignment with the natural world, which is what Ayurveda will get to. We'll talk about that more in a few minutes. And so we begin to weave the components of Ayurveda into a yoga practice to understand again how to make the yoga practice feel really balanced for each person, and also how to adjust it to fluctuations in the seasons and the weather and one's lifestyle and one's age of life and so on. So I think Krishna might want to elaborate a little bit more on this, and we'll start going into the basics of Ayurveda here in a few minutes, but just so you kind of have a sense of how these two systems come together in a course like this.
I really appreciate your point, Ayana, about how Ayurveda would already be in the culture. So growing up, you would have that Ayurveda, it would be permeating through your kitchen growing up. And so what we're doing here in the West is, as we want to bring this tree, if you will, this tree of wealth, tree of knowledge from India and plant it here in the West, is begin to go through and start to create an educational understanding around Ayurveda and how we use the practices and principles of Ayurveda. If Ayurveda is defined again as the science of life or the wisdom of life, we want to see that the yogis and rishis of yoga, when they were first intuiting, they foresaw that there was going to become a time where humans left the forests and the mountains and would go into civilization. And when you take people and you put them in towns and cities, then you begin to have disease. And from that it's kind of amazing that they had this insight, because they had it thousands of years before human civilizations began to flourish. Then they began to codify, if you will, and hone in these diet and lifestyle practices. So what we want to understand is that Ayurveda is probably 80%
diet and lifestyle.
Preventative medicine, which is really great news for the Western docs, because here in the West, when you go to a primary physician, they don't have the time for that. They have to really stay, focused with very large, full-blown cases. And when you come in with diet and lifestyle issues, which are not able to be addressed in, let's say, a little 20-minute session as fully as their training allows and their specialties allow, what we can do is actually take some pressure and some self-responsibility off from the doctors, which is kind of an interesting point, because you don't really hear that spoken of very often. But what you eat on your kitchen table and the way you eat it is just as important as the medicine at the very end of the line, and hopefully mitigating a lot of those factors so that we can take pressure off the Western healthcare system.
And similarly, with the application to the yoga practice of these Ayurvedic principles, how we practice getting on the mat, sitting to meditate, doing some pranayama, some breath work, all these things, again, they affect our lifestyle in a big way. And in that 80% of illnesses being diet and lifestyle, the lifestyle piece there, people live with so much stress. I mean, when you have people fill out a questionnaire of who experiences stress on like a health intake form, it's something like 99% of people check off that they're stressed. It's everywhere. It's rampant. We know this. You all experience it. And so learning ways to deal with the stress is very important if we don't want to end up living a sick life. And so here we apply these principles of Ayurveda to the yoga practice to make sure that that yoga practice is really healing and balancing to the individual. Because sometimes we take these pieces from the East and we pull them out of their context and we say, I'm going to do this one practice. Well, that's wonderful, but do we understand when to do that practice, how to do it, what kind of individual should do that practice, and so on. And so sometimes pulling it out of its context, little pieces can get lost in translation. And so by weaving the Ayurvedic piece in, we start to develop a larger picture, a larger framework of yoga and its sister sciences. So we say, oh, okay, this individual does really well with that practice, or, oh, I need to practice at this time of day versus that time of day to really feel whole and balanced.
And I'm really excited about being an Ayurvedic educator in the West, because not only does it place a lot of personal responsibility in our health and wellness back in our own basket, if you will, it also helps us take yoga off the mat. And so a lot of people will come and they come into the door of asana, and that's awesome. And if you're not doing your sun salutation, or maybe even doing some pranayamas that you're learning in your class, or maybe even a little meditation, which can all be applied in a doshic way for your constitution, what you can do is you can start to see that when you step off your mat, there's a whole field open to you. We want to just begin to differentiate between yogic practices and Ayurvedic practices. And the difference between Ayurvedic practices and yogic practices is yogic practices are normally done under a very strict seclusion with somebody like a personal attendant feeding you, cooking your meals. You're outside of society.
In a classical sense.
In a classical sense, yeah. So, but when we practice yoga as a way of life, when you start to see the yogic diet, for example, compared to the Ayurvedic diet, they're different diets. And that's very exciting. And what we begin to see is, I'm just giving you big ideas here, that when we open the door, because that's what we're looking to do, is open the door for Ayurveda to come into your life and into your kitchen, into your meditation, how you practice, and when you practice all these different ways of these different techniques. What you begin to see is that they begin to become completely specialized. What I'd like to point out is that there's a little shloka on the previous page that just begins to talk about what's called Desha, Kala, and Jati. And it talks about time, place, and circumstance. And what's so exciting about this course is people in the West have been going to yoga classes for 40 or 50 years. Let's say yoga came over 100 years ago. But yoga's been pretty well nourished here for the last 50 years. So you can say yoga in the West and people understand. Now they're starting to hear the word Ayurveda and they think diet and lifestyle. And as that doorway opens, and as you step through that, what we begin to see is, due to time, place, and circumstance, we can begin to specialize asana practices for seasons, for ages of life, and for specific illnesses. So what it does, Ayurveda, when you start to bring Ayurveda into your yogic practice, it creates a specialized practice. Rather than a general yogic practice, you begin to start to take on a specific yogic practice. And usually after you get done a course like this, usually your asana practice changes because you begin to move it. So that's very exciting. We're still in the opening remarks here. So a lot of our talking is kind of on the bigger side for a picture, and we'll get more, don't worry, we'll get more details. That's coming. But with this time, place, and circumstance, in the Shiva Shakti School of Yoga, our sort of vision is the yoga for householders. Not that we don't want to include the children. Of course, children are part of households. And not that we don't want to include the forest dwellers, the Grammies and the Grampies, right? And also we don't want to disclude the elders as well. But most that are coming through in the beginning are yoga in the world, when we define yoga for householders. And yoga in the world looks like you're on the mat for a bit, and then maybe doing some meditation and pranayama, and then you're in life. And then you say, like Yana said, you got stress coming in or bad choices coming in, and then how can we use Ayurveda day to day, moment to moment, to begin to start to make all these little micro shifts in our diet and lifestyle, and be able to take yoga off the mat and into our daily lives. This Ayurvedic science is going to be a great boon for not only you, but also for your family. So we've kind of gone through linking these two systems together. And as we kind of shift here, I think we can kind of begin to move into the 5 elements. So we'll start to kind of go in a little deeper now. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to pass a little bit of the talking stick to Yana, and I'll chime in as we go.
To see on the next page in your manual, the Pancha Mahabhutas, the 5 elements. And these are really the building blocks, you could say, of Ayurveda, of everything in Ayurveda. And also in yoga. They're part of Samkhya philosophy, which is at the root of both of these systems. But we'll be speaking more, kind of giving an overview of the principles of Ayurveda right now. And then you'll see throughout this course, we'll be returning back to these principles regularly, but applying them to different practices and so on. So with these 5 elements, many of you may be familiar with these. You have Akasha, or space, also ether. You have air, or Vayu. You have Agni, fire. You have Jala, sometimes also called Apas, water. And you have Prithvi, the earth element. So you have these 5 elements, and these are found everywhere. In the natural world around us, if you think of a hot day in the summer, we would say, wow, there's a lot of Agni, there's a lot of fire present. You've got the heat from the sun heating up, there's a lot of brightness from that sun, a lot of luminosity. People are hot, people are saying, wow, it's summertime, there's more heat in general if you live in the northern hemisphere. So gosh, Agni is predominant as an element. So it exists in the natural world, it exists seasonally, in our weather, in our climate, and it exists in our bodies and in any living creature for that matter. And so these 5 elements, we all have all 5 elements in our body. We have different compositions of these 5 elements, but we all have all 5 of them. So let's just look at the elements a little bit more. So we have this element Akash, or space, or ether. And one of the key characteristics you can think of with space, with Akash, is spaciousness, is that it creates space in the mind. It's the space inside of our organs. So if you think of a hollow organ, like the stomach, when there's no food in it, there's Akash inside of that space. When you think of the mind, when you're meditating or when you're just having a peaceful moment and the mind is quiet, there's an element of space present where there's an open quality to the mind very often. And so this element of space, it's all around us, it's inside of us, and it's very stable. So if you think about outer space, you think you get beyond the atmosphere of our own earth and you just get out there, you know that it's just kind of this open space and there's no not a lot of weight to it, and it's just very open and still. And I think sometimes people forget the still piece, but it's important to hone into that characteristic with the element of space, is that there's a still quality to it. So when we say, gosh, cultivating this element of space, it also cultivates like an open, still quality in the mind or in the body. So important just to note that. Do you want to add anything?
Classically speaking, how the Nyaya Sutras define space from the 24 elements of Samkhya. Space can not be known directly. It's only known through its inference, because you can't smell it, you can't wet it, you can't cut it, you can't burn it. You can only know it through its absence, like a pot. So you have a pot, and you can know space by the space inside the pot. And then you break the pot, and you say, oh, but the space is actually still unaffected. So space is a little tricky like that. It's the substratum and very fine, ultrafine substance, if you will. They would classify it as a dravya, ultrafine substance that all the other elements exist in. So when you don't have enough personal space, you're like, there's my space. So you know space directly. And we'll talk more about space, but that's just my little piece of space.
So it's the subtlest of all of the elements. And now moving from subtlest to grossest as in most dense, the next element we come to is vayu, or air. So it's also quite light in nature, light as in weight. And vayu, or air, governs movement in the body, movement around us. So when you think about wind, then you can think about how air creates movement. So there's the wind blowing the trees around. There's the wind creating like a cool effect on the body in the fall time as the weather begins to change if you're in a more northern area. In the body, vayu governs all movement. So a nerve impulse traveling along a channel, that would be governed by vayu. You think about gas moving through the body. You've eaten something, it's created some gas in the body, it's moving through. So that's vayu, that's the element of air passing through the body. But it's movement versus the hollow space of the stomach, which is just space. Air has a little bit more, it's a little more active, certainly, than space. And you can start to see it a bit. If you think of steam rising, so that's air, but actually you can see it. Or you think of smoke, you can see it. So it starts to be visible at times. Sometimes it's not visible, such as the wind. So at times it takes on a visible quality. Can you feel it? You can feel its effects. So you can't necessarily hold on to air, but you can feel, oh, it made my skin cool, or oh, I was out in the wind all day, it dried out my skin. The effects of vayu.
So vayu, classically speaking, the way they define would be form without substance. So you can see the form of the wind, the shape of the wind blowing on the trees by the leaves rolling over. You say, oh, that's a rough wind today, or oh, that's a really gentle wind on the water. You say, oh, it's a really soft wind. What a breeze. We call it a breeze, I guess. Mm-hmm. Like that. So they're going to get heavier and heavier as we go.
Yes. And then also, of course, it governs any kind of respiration in the body and things like this, breathing. Then we come to the element of Agni, or of fire. And so then we come to one that is fully visible. We can generally always see fire, whereas air is occasionally visible in the form of smoke, something like this. Then we come to fire and we can fully see it. And we can feel it, obviously. And so it begins to take on a little bit more form and substance. With fire, it governs transformation in the body and around us. So if you think of the way that if you put a log on a fire, it transforms it. The fire burns that log and turns it into ash. And so likewise, this element of Agni in the body governs all the metabolic processes. And so it governs any kind of transformation in the body. So we take some food into our mouth. It is Agni in the digestive system. It's fire, we say in Ayurveda, the digestive fire, which could correlate into science as enzymes in the stomach, hydrochloric acid, so on, creates this transformative process in the stomach and then through the small intestine, eventually all the way out of the body, that turns that food into something the body can use, and eventually it comes out of the body as waste. So that's the element of fire at work in the body. It also governs vision, so we'll speak more about this later on. So governs the eyes and luminosity to the body.
So what you can see, Ayana's outlining for you, is actually an unfolding from I'm going to say it in an easy way, an unfolding of manifestation from the most subtle and least dense into form. So it goes from space into air, and then from air is created fire. This is the creation process. And by the time creation comes into fire, you see fire has a form that we can, a tangible form that we see with the eyes, but it's a form without density. Whereas when we get to the others, they're more dense. So there's a form, but it doesn't have a density to it. So the elements are continuing to coalesce, if you will, as we go down through and explain them.
Yes. So next we come to the element of water, of apas or jala. And so with the water element, water governs fluidity and particularly cohesiveness in the body. So you think of all the way fluid moves in the body and all of its functions, from the plasma inside of the blood to lymph in the body to synovial fluid in the joints. So what it does is it lubricates the body, very important, and it creates this cohesiveness. So if there was no fluid in the body, well, for one thing, the body would be very dry and brittle. There would be nothing to help us move with any fluidity. Joints without synovial fluid are very painful, and they would eventually stop moving because there's no fluid to help them move. If we had no juices in our digestive tract, food wouldn't move. It would just be too dry. It would just get stuck and so on. And so we need this water element in our body to hold things together and also to create fluidity through the body. The water element also governs nourishment. So physically speaking, also if you think of the natural world, when there are droughts or when there's very little rain, then crops die and people have a hard time with their gardens because there's nothing to nourish. So that water provides so much nourishment to the natural world. Similarly, the water element coming into our body, we need that for nourishment on every level of our being.
And so by the time we get to describing water from a classical sense, you see that it's form with fluidity. Those are the kind of key words as we're looking at the water element.
And then lastly, we come to Prithvi, or earth, and its main quality is stability. And it's the densest of all the elements. It has the most form in that you can look at a rock and it will stay relatively the same shape for quite a long time. I mean, obviously we know that rocks can be eroded, but very slowly compared to how the fluid nature of water takes on a different shape all the time. And fire, it's like constantly switching shapes and it doesn't have much density to it. And so on with the other ones, even less and less dense. So earth, it assumes a form, it's solid, it's dense. In the body, it gives form to the body, gives weight to the body. So when we think of the fleshiness of the body, when we think of like the heaviness of the body, that's the earth at work. So when we take food into the body, all different foods have different compositions of elements, but they always have a quality of earth in that there's form and substance to when we put food into our mouth versus simply breathing air. If we only subsisted on air, we would look quite different than if we were taking.
Well, then you'd be in heaven.
Perhaps.
Okay. So the key words there were form with substance, and you'll see when we're looking through in the lens of Ayurveda, the water and the earth are going to be the elements that will be creating most of the body. So if you look at the body itself as a bag of water, 80% water, and then inside of that water we're like the ocean, right? So we have salt, which is interesting because salt is an element, it's earth, and we have to have salt. Think about in the body calcium in the way of bones. Think about in the body iron, in the blood itself. Iron, that's just straight old-fashioned earth in the body. So here we are, we have this body with the elements, you understand elements, the actual earth elements, and then the body is heated as well. If the body is not heated, then you have hypothermia, or you have hypothermia, I guess. I don't know if you call it hypothermia. Maybe you would, yeah. Or hyper, elevated temperature. And if it's not in between a certain parameters, there's no life there. And then for the vayu, you have all of those neurological impulses, afferent and efferent nerve pathways that are continually being fired all the time, back all the circulation, any type of circulation in the body. And then finally, space, that everything is happening, and all this is happening in the field of space, and then all the space that is the space between the cells, space in the organs, like Yana said, that it's all existing in. So it's a beautiful inner and outer way of being able to see not just us, but the world itself through the 5 elements.
Yes.
Yeah.
So these are your building blocks, as I said before, of everything in Ayurveda. And from these 5 elements, then we see the formation of the 3 doshas. So probably many of you have heard this term dosha before. So dosha is sometimes referred to as a constitution, but let's just clarify that for a moment. There is one's constitution, more accurately described as one's prakriti, which is in your manual. If you turn to the next page, where you see tridosha, and then you see down below prakriti. Prakriti is, we'll go into it in more depth here in a moment, but that is your constitution from the time of your birth. And then you have your current state, your vikriti, which fluctuates, but that's where we really see the play of the doshas. So these doshas are sometimes said to be the constitution, but just keep in mind that if you look at the root of the word dosha, you come to dusht, which means to go out. So dosha is really looking at what's going out of balance in the body. So we'll clarify that more in a moment, but just to give the quick definition of dosha before we go into describing these, I would say more loosely, we could say let's first talk about the 3 mind-body types, and then we'll talk about one where it goes out of balance, and one which is your constitution, which is your innate balance. So with these 3 doshas, you have vata, pitta, and kapha. Vata being comprised mainly of air and space, of vayu and of akash. And so these we know as the lightest in weight of all the elements. And so when we see this play out in a body and in a mind, it shows up as usually, I say usually, we see all different kinds of embodiments of these days, but the vata body type tends to be lighter in nature, lighter in weight, can be very tall or very short, but isn't usually really big boned. And vata in the mind creates, when it's balanced, a real adaptability, a creativity. If you think of how the wind can move and take any shape, any form, you think of what this would do inside a body and a mind. And so someone who's a vata type, we'd see them as pretty adaptable, pretty creative, often very artistic. When it goes out of balance, then we see too much vata. We see it as the mind incessantly running, the mind worrying, lots of anxiety, lots of fear. We see it as kind of like roughness and dryness in the skin, like when you've been in the wind too long and the skin dries out. This is what happens when we have too much vata. We dry out, the body dries out. Premature aging, this is like excess vata, lots of wrinkles forming, things like this. We'd say, oh wow, there's so much vata. If you think of climate, like a high desert where there's lots of cool air at night, or maybe a fluctuation, it might be hot during the day but cold at night, that irregularity and erraticness is vata. And then the dryness of the desert, classic vata. We'll talk more about the characteristics in a moment. But vata types can be very like go with the flow, just like the wind, like, hey, I think I'm going to do this right now. Oh, tomorrow I think I'm going to switch careers. I'm just not feeling it with, I was really into computer work and then I just realized it's not my thing. I think I'm going to get into teaching dance. I'm going to go do a dance teacher training. They do that for 6 months and they're like, yeah, I tried it. I don't know. I think I just need to go. I think I'm just going to take a retail job for a little bit and just keep it easy, not have to think so much teaching.
You're doing a very nice job modeling the Vata mind right now.
Right.
Creative and quite...
all over. Yes. So Vata, do you want to add anything for Vata quite yet?
What landed it for me was one of our teachers, he called the Vatas the skinny mini body type. Just the Vata body type, they're very difficult to put weight on. Their body, no matter what, is always cold. Even in the summer day, they still reaching for a shawl, can never quite get warm enough. Vata body type is I don't want to get too deep into it without going down the syllabus. But Vata body type is that thinner body type, and when you start to lens, you kind of look like skinny, medium, and then goddess like this. If you kind of start to body type Vata, Pitta, Kapha, you can see that the minds will do Vata mind, Pitta mind, or Kapha mind. Usually if you have Vata body, you have Vata mind, but not always, like Yana was saying, or Pitta body and Pitta mind, or Kapha body, Kapha mind. So you want to start to you can start to lens, and the way you're lensing this is through the 5 elements. And the way you start to look at people is you start to see the combination of elements inside of them. When you start to look at the Vata being the space and air predominant, they have fire and water and earth certainly in them, because they eat apples and has water and earth in it and a little fire because the sun had to grow the apple, right? So like this. But similarly, how those elements are expressing themselves through their body type. And that's what the constitution is. And usually once you're born into a body type, that's your constitution. Now your constitution can get covered up with your Vikruti, which is your imbalance, like that. So Vata.
So then we come to Pitta. So Pitta, predominantly fire and a little bit of water. And so with the Pitta body type, as Krishna was saying a moment ago, usually medium body size, and often muscular. Pittas can build muscle quite quickly. Fairly strong body type, not the strongest, but fairly strong. And usually, if they're balanced, pretty good digestion, because all that fire in the body means strong digestive fire. So they can digest a lot of food well. Sometimes you'll meet those Pittas and they're like, I'm always hungry. I can eat anytime. You're like, well, we just had a pretty good sized breakfast. Oh, it's okay. You can give me another meal. I'll eat it. I'm fine. I just burn it all up. And they're like this person that's just medium. They're not overweight at all. And they just eat the food and who knows where it goes, but it gets transformed. That's that strong digestive fire at work, which is classic in a Pitta body type. But sometimes they run a little hot, like you feel a Pitta on the skin and they'll be warm, but excess Pitta will show up as the person's just always hot. They're like, I can't be in the sun, I will just overheat. So we see that sometimes. In the mind, Pitta creates a very strong mind. Very, very strong mind. Strong focus, strong drive. Knows what they want to do, very clear, good speakers. We often see Pittas as teachers or as managers. They're great at directing the show. They know what they want to do. They know how to get from A to Z and get everything done in between. Quite the taskmaster. Unfortunately, sometimes when Pitta goes out of balance, as all of these body-mind types can go out of balance, then we see that to excess, becoming controlling of the people around them, or trying to dictate what everybody's doing, being a little too sharp when one is, offering feedback or asking someone to do something. It's like, do this for me right now. And there's no invitation, there's no sweetness. That would be the fire creating a little too much sharpness in an individual. We also see it as anger, as irritability. When you think of someone saying, oh, I'm hot under the collar, that's classic Pitta. That's like, I'm getting hot, and now I'm like, what are you doing? And it's all this irritability and anger showing up. You're stuck in traffic, you're trying to get home from work, it's taking an extra hour to get home because of the traffic, and you're going, what are these people doing? Like, why do they have to, and you're just getting all irritable. That's pitta increasing in the mind. So we see a lot of pitta. It's really, I would say, idealized in our culture these days, and we'll probably go into more conversation about that later on. But we see a lot of pitta at play, and sometimes we see a little too much of it in our, I dare say, across the whole world these days, but certainly in Western culture.
So what we want to start to do is start to think about is what does a healthy vata look like, artistic, and quite mobile, and can be actually quite playful and very creative. And the pitta is, has a tendency to be a little bit more intellectual in nature. Can be like an attorney or surgeon kind of energy. Like Ayana said, certainly a teacher. In its balanced form, they make excellent leaders and great generals. And I know that there are probably 10 generals watching this. But you have that kind of leadership, energy, which is awesome. But you see New York City is kind of filled with pitta energy, and the Western culture is kind of very fiery and a lot of driven, and it creates a really strong sense of imbalance, because if you're a vata, we just mentioned vata because we cover that, and you're sitting next to a pitta, the pitta will have a tendency to assume that they're right, and the vata will be like, well, I'm not even sure. Okay, yeah, I guess you probably know better than I do, which isn't even the case, because the vata had a great creative thought, and the pitta was like, no, this is how we really should do it. So without a balance, they're not so great. And what we want to do is be able to create healthy space for the vata people to be the vata people, and the pitta people to be the pitta people, and the kapha people to be the kapha people. And that's what we're heading towards.
Mm. So when we come to kapha, the final one where we see a concentration of the earth and the water elements, the prithvi and the jala, then we see the densest of all the body types. And so in general, kaphas are a little bigger boned, a little more solid build. Doesn't mean that they're overweight. Overweight only shows up when kapha goes out of balance. Instead, they're just solid. Like if you see someone and you look at their joints and they just have solid joints, you don't see any bony protuberances sticking out, and their joints seem like pretty supple very often, because kapha, with all that water in them, they're often very flexible in their joints if they're balanced. But at least what you see is like the joint looks solid. You may not all people are going to be flexible, but you'll see like right here, this bone sticking out. See that? You wouldn't see that so much on someone who has predominant kapha body type. You don't see the elbow bones sticking out. So they just have like a good solid build and very grounded. So all that earth, it lends to a grounded quality in the mind and in the body. They take their time doing things. They move slower typically than the other two doshas. But that doesn't mean that moving slowly is a negative quality of it. It's just they take their time. They're often very thorough, can be very organized, very loyal, very loving, those kind of like earth mother goddess types, that kind of energy, very kaphic in nature. Like every time my friend shows up, she brings muffins for everybody, and they're like, wow, how do you have time to make all those muffins? And that's so sweet of you. That's that kapha, like, I just love to make food for everybody. That kind of quality is very kaphic in nature. When out of balance, we see it as kind of a tamasic side of it is like the person doesn't want to move at all. They just want to stay on the couch, and they're just sitting on the couch. You see that kapha, you're like, well, where's my friend Fred? Oh, he's on the couch. That's where he always is. Oh, that would be a situation of kapha being out of balance, just sitting there. A fear of changing, and it's not so much the fear emphasis, but just not wanting to ever change. Just, I do the same thing, I've been at the same job for 35 years, and whether or not the person's happy with it, they're not going to change because they are just set in their ways. That is kapha also. Putting on extra weight, kapha out of balance, and so on.
We teach these education courses quite a bit. And what's coming up for me is like you could think a kapha elephant would be a kapha kind of animal. They just kind of move slowly along. Well, like a pitta animal, let's say, because you could see it in animals too. It would be like tiger. rah, like okay, tiger. Or like for, let's see, I'm going to give you a really sweet one for Vata. How about for Vata animal? How about like dragonfly? Right, nice colors, but they kind of flit around. They're kind of really beautiful. So it's very sweet like that. Just one, I'll do one more. So like you could say in a tree. So maybe like a willow tree because it has so much water and it's kind of just bends and willow, right? Maybe like a bamboo because the bamboo's hollow and blows back and forth. Vata. Let me think of a pitta. A pitta like well, I was gonna say hawthorn because it's maybe that's Vata. I got a pitta one. It's not a tree, but how a poison ivy. Right, because it could get all that that's burning sensation, right? That's the fire element in the plant itself. So you can see how Vata, Pitta, Kapha shows up not just in our bodies, but also in nature as well. And you start to say, oh, what you're looking for when you start to lens like this is does it have a predominance of earth? And you see your friend, and you notice your friend, they're like, I'm trying to lose weight. You're like, gosh, you've lost 40 pounds. You look fantastic. But they'll never lose the weight on their elbow. Like their protuberance, you don't lose weight on your bony protuberances. You don't really lose a lot of weight here on your forearm, right? So if you look at your wrist is your wrist. And if your fingers don't go around, see that's a little bit more, I go like this. I see on the camera. It's more pitta because they touch. Kapha, they never touch. And Vata, the finger will go around. And that's just the structure of the body itself. So you can't fake out the dosha. You can cover up the dosha itself with the imbalance. So you can have someone that's really obese on a Vata body. You could mistake them for Kapha, but that's the imbalance. So you have to be able to start to see their nature first. And we're really heading towards understanding what the imbalances are primarily, and then secondarily we'll get to people's natures.
Right. So you'll see the next two words, the Prakriti and Vikriti, which I mentioned a few moments ago. But returning back to those, Prakriti is one's constitution. And so from the time that one is conceived, that's really when the Prakriti is formed, one's constitution, one's mind body type. It can shift during the time in utero, but there's many factors that go into that constitution. So the predominant elements in the weather and in the time of year, the predominant elements of the parents at the time that the child was conceived, the predominant energies, you could say, of the emotions that the two parents were feeling, the alignment of the stars, what part of the world this person was conceived in, what kind of elements were present. All these things go in and they create that composition of the elements and therefore the composition of the doshas in that individual. And so then that constitution is set. During the time in utero, it can shift depending on the mother's health, what she's doing, and so on. But by the time a child is born, then that constitution, that blend of the elements and the doshas, is set for life. It very, very rarely shifts, only under extreme circumstances. So in general, we say that it's set for life. And so that balance, most people will have one dosha that's predominant, and then usually a secondary dosha that's somewhere not so far behind. So someone might be a Pitta Kapha, and they will have a little bit of Vata in them too, but it's much, much less. So usually we'd say, okay, people are Pitta Kapha, or someone might be a Vata Kapha. Usually it's dual dosha we see the most of these days. Occasionally we see someone who just has so much of one dosha that we really say, oh, they're just single doshic. They're really just mostly Vata. And we'll do a chart later on in this course to check in and things like this. But some people have so much of one dosha, we just say, okay, they're Vata, and their amounts of Pitta and Kapha are negligible. It's not really much. Then you have a few people who are tridoshic, where the balance of the three doshas is fairly equal, and so then you kind of have all three there in the constitution. And so we're not looking to try to get to one point or another. We're not trying to all be single doshic. We're not trying to all be tridoshic. We're really just trying to say, what is our constitution, to tug that out, and that is that person's unique balance, and that's their balance for that person. Like if Krishna is mostly Pitta Kapha, we say that's his balance. And then what we do is then try to look at the Vikriti, which is the current state. So based on diet, based on lifestyle, based on the climate one lives in, based on the amount of stress they're experiencing, the blend and the balance of the doshas may shift. It may be exactly the same as the Prakriti, and if it is exactly the same amounts of the elements and therefore the doshas, then we would say that individual is balanced. Very often, though, we see an increase of one dosha or maybe a couple of doshas, and that is the Vikriti, when it's something different than the Prakriti, when the person has more Pitta than normal, or let's say if someone's Pitta Kapha and we see a bunch of Vata in their current state, maybe this person's been very stressed out and they've been traveling a lot. All the movement of travel would increase Vata in anybody. And then a lot of stress is going to increase Vata in the mind. So that person might be experiencing more Vata than is typically found in their constitution. And so we'd say, oh, they have Vata Vikriti, they have high Vata. And so what we do with someone like that is we work to try to bring that Vata back down, back into balance. So that Vikriti is any dosha that is higher. We generally in Ayurveda talk about a dosha going into excess. We say that dosha is higher, and so we need to treat that first to then bring the person back towards their natural Prakriti state.
I'm just going to hold just for a second.
Okay. So Prakriti and Vikriti, good terms to know. Now, let's look on the next page, and you'll see under Tridosha, you'll see a chart, and you'll see some different qualities, some different gunas listed underneath each dosha. And these qualities are helpful in understanding the doshas more. So we'll be having classes on each specific dosha, but just to overview these first, know that to begin to determine what we're seeing in an individual, and therefore what dosha is predominant in the current state, we say, okay, well, the predominant qualities for Vata are dryness, lightness, and that's lightness as in weight, not lightness as in luminosity, but lightness as in the weight, and cold. So these three are your main ones: dry, light, and cold for Vata. And then we can also say subtle and mobile, as in all that movement of Vata. Rough, as in when the skin gets rough from being out in the wind too much. Hard. And so those are your main ones for Vata. We're going to give some more examples on the next page, but I'm just running through them to start. With Pitta, the qualities, that are predominant are oily. And so this is where, when I mentioned Pitta, I said it's predominantly fire with a little bit of water. The water shows up in Pitta dosha as an oily quality. So very often Pitta's skin on the face, when you look at a Pitta person, there's a slight sheen to it. It's a slight oily quality coming out in the skin. Classic Pitta. So that is that water, that's how it's manifesting in the body, is through an oiliness. Lightness, just like with Vata, lightness and weight, like the fire. Hot, obviously, when we think of fire that's predominant in Pitta, there's the heat. Sharpness, like the way that fire has a sharp quality, and that if it burns you, it's like, ow, it has a sharp quality. And so with Pitta, very often the speech, when Pitta is too high, too excessive, the speech feels very sharp. Like, what are you doing? Like, there's no, like, just, hey, what's going on today? There's no sweetness to it. It's just like, what are you doing? Oh, sharp. Spreading. So the spreading quality refers to how Pitta moves through the body. So Vata moves very quickly, but Pitta, like a rash, because Pitta governs the skin and rashes that come out, you'll see how rashes kind of often spread across the body. Or you think about a volcano, and you think about lava, and how that hot molten lava spreads, flows
Liquidity,
slowly.
heat and liquid.
Yeah. So that's Pitta. And then it also has a liquid quality to it. And so then again, we kind of can think of the example of lava. And then lastly, when we come to Kapha, its qualities are oily. And so again, that's how the water shows up. And so Kaphas will very often say, oh my God, my hair always feels oily. It doesn't matter if I've taken a shower and washed my hair that day. I could take 3 showers a day, my scalp would still feel oily. Sometimes it's all the skin too, but it's that well lubricated quality of kapha from all the water. Heavy, so as opposed to lightness, that heaviness, that denseness of the body. Cold, so when we think of the water and the earth, you think of quality of like mud when you mix the water and earth together. Very often it's cool. You think of late spring, or actually maybe I wouldn't say late spring, I'd say early spring. If you're in a part of the world where there's snow and the snow is slowly melting in the springtime, it's a kapha quality. It's like it's still cool. So kapha is when you've touched the skin, it feels cool and also a little bit clammy. As opposed to vata, you feel their skin, it feels dry and cold, or their extremities will feel very cold. Dull and slow, and so for kapha, that slow quality. And so the dullness is usually when it's out of balance. It's like the mind gets a little dull when there's too much kapha. But the mind of kapha in general moves a little bit slower than the other doshas. It doesn't have to always be dull, but slower in general. And then stable, that earth, creating that stable quality. Smooth. So if you feel kapha's skin, it often feels very smooth. And lastly, soft. Again, you can think of it, soft, smooth skin, classic for kapha. And then if you jump ahead a couple pages, you'll see a page with the 20 gunas listed again. And so here you have more examples. And you also see how these qualities balance one another. And so you have on the left side of this chart, it says building, nourishing guna. And then a couple columns over, you have a chart that says reducing, lightening quality. And so the Sanskrit terms that go with this are brahmana, goes for building and nourishing. So these qualities have tendency to create like nourishment, building of tissue in the body, grounding the body, calming the body. On the other side, this alangana is cleansing, it's lightening. So when you say, oh, I need a cleansing diet, it's going to create lightness in the body. It's also going to usually like, like reduce mass, but it also creates lightness in the mind too. So if someone's already feeling ungrounded and then they say, oh, I'm going to eat like a really cleansing diet, it often makes them feel even more spacey or ungrounded. So these two are different sides. It's like a yin and a yang. They create balance and a polarity with each other. And so then you have examples of all these.
I think for yourself, as coming into this doorway of Ayurveda, we recommend that you start to lens the world through the 5 elements. And so when we say lens the world through the 5 elements, that means begin to see the 5 elements. And how do we know the elements? This is the key takeaway, is through their qualities. So we know that the air has a natural cooling to it. And so when we look at water, we know that water is naturally cold. So fire in the water is the heat element, pitta, penetrating into water. Or a hot breeze, the pitta is penetrating into the breeze like that, because air is naturally cold and water is naturally cold like that. So when we see the element move into another element like that, that's the dosha. So similarly, we can take that idea of our constitution, and when we see elements move in the body, what we want to see is, or begin to think, is that the body is mostly made of what? Earth and water. Okay? And then fire, and then air, and then space. Well, the earth wants to stay stable. Okay? Well, the thing about the air element in the vata being so light, it's the easiest element to move out of balance because it's so light. The mind is predominantly air moving back and forth like that. We call the manovahasrota, the mental channel of the face in the mind itself. Well, when the vata goes out, it's also, you want to say, the easiest to bring back in. When the kapha goes out, because it's like pushing a stone over one way, we have to give a little bit more effort. So kapha is a little bit heavier, and we pull kapha in. So it takes a little bit more effort to get kapha out. and to push it out, but also a little more effort to bring it back. So most of the diseases you see, it's in the classics, maybe 80 are Vata. I think, gosh, is it 40 of Pitta and 20 of Kapha? Did I get those numbers right? Mm-hmm. So most of the time we see the Vata. So the good news is Vata is easy to go out, but also easiest to bring back. And then Pitta, medium strength, and Kapha is the hardest to get out because it's earth, it wants to stay stable, but we bring it back, it's the easiest one to keep in balance. So when you start to look at it through those lenses, you say that there are inherent gifts in being Vata or Pitta or Kapha, but there are also inherent weaknesses in each one of these. And as you start to put the perspective on for yourself, you'll start to say, am I Vata? Am I Vata Pitta? Am I Vata Pitta Kapha? Like this. And that'll be a little confusion for you. You'll get through this course and you'll have a good understanding, and then maybe you'll get a consultation or something like that and get it a little bit more cleared up. But as you move through, learn these 20 elements, start to study them and start to watch them in your environment, in where you live, in the community that you're experiencing. Do you live in a Kapha community? It's a really sleepy community. Do you live in the city and everyone is Vata deranged with Pitta derangement like that? So you start to see the elements playing all around you like this. And this is how you start bringing these 20 elements into your life and start using them and understanding them. That's what I kind of wanted to say before.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yes. Let's just look at this chart just for another moment or two, just so you can start to really get a sense for these gunas, because these qualities, when you understand them well, they're very helpful to then, when you're looking at your own self or you're talking to a student, you're starting to go, what dosha is predominant right now? Like, what do they have going on? You think of these qualities, and these qualities will tell you what's going on. Likewise, if you're looking at food, a piece of food, and you're saying, I wonder if this, this watermelon, I wonder what qualities, I wonder what dosha is predominant. Well, you think of its qualities right away, and you think, well, it's pretty watery, it's pretty liquid, and you start to figure it out, and then you say, oh, well, then you immediately know, oh gosh, it's pretty Kaphic, it's cooling, and it's watery, and it's cold, and there we go. So let's look at these just so we get a good sense for the qualities. And if you can compare the two, for the ones that really, some of them have really clear comparisons, it's very easy then to say, oh, is it this or this that I'm seeing show up in a person or in anything for that matter? So you have the quality of heaviness, Sanskrit term guru, and then on the other side you have lagu, or lightness. And so if you think of somebody's body, so you pick up this arm and it has like one weight to it, and then you feel this arm and it has another weight to it. How much lightness is there? How much heaviness is there? Okay, then we get a sense it's literally physical weight most of the time. Slow or dull, so manda, and on the other side of that equation is tikshna, or sharpness. So when you think, an example here you'll see is digestion. So that slowness in a kapha body, digestion usually moves more slowly. And so it doesn't mean that they're eating something that's not balanced. Food just moves through their body in a slower manner, as opposed to a pitta, where they have this sharp quality inherent in them. They eat food and it goes through their body quickly. And sometimes pittas, when they have too much, they'll get acid reflux or they'll get indigestion. It has that sharp kind of burning quality in the stomach. So that's that tikshna, that sharpness showing up in the digestive tract, as opposed to the slowness on the other side. And then, of course, we can also think about it in terms of speech, too. Sharp speech with pitta when there's too much pitta, or that slow and deliberate speech that we often see with kapha. It's like every thought seems really well thought out. Sometimes they'll even really pause and you think the person's never going to talk. And then they say something, and they've been just thinking on it. Or maybe they don't feel like they have to rush into saying something. Like, what's the point in filling up the space with words? They're just okay with taking their time coming to that, whatever they need to say. And then we have cold and hot. So cold, hima, also known as shita, and then hot, which is ushna. And so the cold quality we see predominantly in vatas and kaphas, and that heat quality we see in pittas. So temperature of skin, You can often, vatas, like I said, are cold in the hands and feet, and kaphas tend to be cold. Their whole body kind of has a coolness, not as much of a coldness, but a coolness, and pittas feel warm. Also, we'll just leave it there for now. I was going to say the weather, so of course we can use the weather example for these. And then oily or unctuous snigdha, and then dry or ruksha for the dryness and oiliness. So as I mentioned, kapha and pitta have a slightly oily quality to them, or in kapha it's not slight, it's usually quite a bit. And then vata has the dry quality. So you can think about it as showing up in the skin. Also in terms of how the body's lubricated. Vatas, you'll often hear the joints cracking and popping, dryness in the joints, whereas kaphas, sometimes I'll be like, I've never heard a joint crack. Like, they just are fluid. It's like kind of like, you could say it's oily or it's just well lubricated in the joints. Next one down, smooth versus rough. Smooth is slakshana and rough is kara. So smooth skin versus a rougher skin. Dense or thick, sandra versus liquid, drava. And so you think of some bodies and they feel like there's like a density to it. You feel the joints, they feel just dense, or the tissue on the skin feels dense, as opposed to the body feeling very liquidy. And you could also think of foods like this. Some foods are very dense and other ones have a more liquidy nature. And then soft and hard, mridu and katina. So the body feels soft. You feel a kapha body type, and very often it's like you feel it and you're like, oh, there's kind of a softness in the muscles, a softness to the tissue, versus where you get more of that hard quality. You feel the body and you're like, oh, there's no give there. It just feels hard to the touch. So the two sides there. Static or stable, sthira, versus chala, mobile or unstable. And so these two we can often think about in the mind, or often maybe how one lives their life. So someone who has more of that sthira quality, they're going to be more in one place. Kapha, of course, sometimes they don't move as much. They have their one home and they're there for decades. Whereas that vata, where there's more chala, they moved homes 15 times in 15 years. You know, there's like a lot more movement. Or in the mind, that deliberate mind that takes its time, it's not all over the place, versus the mind that's constant movement. And then gross or big, sthula, and then we see subtle or shukshma. So this can be just that sense of like too much weight in the body versus a body that has, you can think of the body, we don't use the term subtle as much in terms of physical, we think of it more in the mind with Ayurveda, but we wouldn't use the opposite side, sthula, to talk about the mind so much. So some of these, as we get further down the list, sometimes the opposites don't line up quite so clearly, but they are two sides. And then the last one, pichula, slimy, sticky, cloudy. We see this as in a sense of fluids in the body, certain fluids. And then the other side is vishada, clear or non-slimy. So I'm not going to go, we don't use these qualities quite so much.
A little bit like sap for pitula
on
a pine tree.
Or it's also like phlegm.
Oh, yeah, there you go. That's a nice one.
You can't see through it versus a fluid that you could see through it more.
Clear.
Yeah. So those, I wouldn't worry too much about at this point. The ones further up are the ones we use the most of when we're thinking about, okay, what am I seeing here? And then you say, okay, yeah, that person's definitely, they've got more heat versus cold. And so then you start to kind of tally up the gunas and you say, oh, yeah, they actually had a lot of gunas in the pitta category and some in the kapha category, not so many in the vata. So you can start to tug out, oh, I think they have a predominance of these doshas in them. Hopefully this is making sense for you. And these gunas, it's another way of thinking. A lot of you may be familiar with the terms vata, pitta, kapha, and then this is another layer to start to understand them a bit more and be able to determine what doshas do you have going on in you and what do you see around you.
Excellent.
Yes. Shall we take them through the chant for this?
Oh, that'd be so nice. I love this.
So we will end this class by doing a chant so that you can see where these come from, these gunas. So if you switch back to your chant, your mantra and chant section, it's the first section of your manual. On the second page of the chant section, some of you have different page numbers, so I'm not giving page numbers, but you'll see at the top, the second page of the chant section, so not page 2, but the second page of the chant section, you'll see Guna Mantra at the top of the page. So this is from the Ashtanga Hridayam, which is a classical Ayurvedic text, and this chant is where these qualities come from. And so they're spoken about and they're described, and so we're going to chant through it slowly first. Maybe Krishna will lead, or we'll lead it slowly, and then we'll let you repeat it back. So we'll just do line by line.
Yep.
Like that. Yes.
And we'll call it out, and then we will also chant back with you the response too.
Or if you lead it, then I'll call back.
Oh, that'd be
there we
nice.
go.
Okay.
So you can repeat back with me. Krishna will lead it the first time. You can just listen, and then you can repeat back.
I'm just going to try to go nice and slow for you. We'll just chant Om. Inhale. Om. Guru Manda Hima Snigdha.
Guru Manda Hima Snigdha.
Slakshna Sandra Mridu Stiraha.
Slakshna Sandra Mridu Stiraha.
Gunaha Sasukshma Vishada.
Gunaha Sasukshma Vishada.
Vimshati Saviparyayaha.
Vimshatre Saviparyayaha.
Tatra Ruksho Lagushita.
Tatra Ruksho Lagushita.
Kara Suksmas Chalo Nilaha.
Tatra Ruksho Kara Sukshmas Chalo Nilaha.
Pitam Sasneha Tikshnokshnam.
Pitam Sasneha Tikshnukshnam.
Lagu Vishram Sarandravam.
Lagu Visram Saram Dravam.
Let's do it all together.
Yes.
Guru Manda Hima Snigdha. Slakshna Sandra Mridu Stiraha. Gunaha Sasukshma Vishada. Vimshati Saviparyaha. Tatra Ruksho Lagushita. Kara Suksmas Chalo Nilaha. Pita Sasneha Tikshnokshnam. Lago Vishram Sarandravam. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Peace Peace Peace.
So that's a little mantra for you. You can continue to practice that. If you're not familiar with chanting, just rewind this part and practice it a few times. It's just fun to kind of source back to where these come from in the classics. And so you can see it's translated there, where the qualities are, and what they mean, and so on. So we just wanted to share that with you. So hopefully this all settles in well for you. If you have questions, know that you can always email questions in, and we do answer questions at the end of each week. And so happy to introduce you to these principles of Ayurveda. And in subsequent classes, we'll begin to take these principles of Ayurveda and weave them into the yogic practice so you can understand how these qualities, how these doshas, how these elements, how we work to create balance with them in the bodies through our yogic practices.
And so, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to study Ayurveda, the science of life, and we look forward to seeing you in the next lecture. Let's chant the Om to close. Inhale.